So it seems like I'm in a room full of friendlies from the earlier applause that went forward. So maybe this will be easier than I thought it might be.
Can't hear you.
And now I'm told by my American friends that my English accent makes me sound like I'm clever, or that I think I'm clever. So let me disabuse you from the beginning. I'm neither of those things. In fact, I have no credentials whatsoever in politics or economics, as you just heard. I studied physics and philosophy, and my interest in politics is actually quite recent, 3 years old, I would say. And so it's perhaps surprising that I'm here. It's an honor to be invited, especially as a Brit, to speak to Americans, to come to Idaho to speak to you. It's not lost on me that I'm a subject of Her Majesty the Queen of England, from which country you found your freedom, and now here I am telling you about freedom. Thank you. Well, I'm not American. I will be in 3 years, and whilst I can't say I am American technically, I do count myself already as an American patriot, and I hope by the end of this you will see why. So let's get going. As Ryan kindly summarised just now, the reason I'm here is that I wrote an article that kind of started a meme. And the superficial argument of the article, which is posted on the Huffington Post, obviously a platform geared for those perhaps in the centre and to the left, and in some cases very far to the left. The superficial argument of the article was that there were good reasons for supporting Obama. I supported Obama. Can I get a hands up, please, of people in this room who, even if they weren't actively involved in getting him elected, were happy when he won? How many do we have? Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, yes, we have a lady here with Obama on the shirt, so I hope we have a wrongful t-shirt we can give her by the time we're finished. And I think the good reasons were, the reasons of principle were perhaps that we didn't like what the neocons and Bush were doing in terms of foreign policy, starting wars of choice that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people from countries that do not threaten us. We were upset with the abrogation of civil rights in this country. We had the Patriot Act. This is something that, as we know, Obama has extended, and with the NDAA, which we might mention later, has taken to whole new heights on the side there. There was also the issue of crony corporatism. Many of us are upset about the Noble contracts in Halliburton, and it all seemed a bit fishy. And now, once again, the revolving door between Goldman Sachs and some of the Federal Reserve boards and indeed the Treasury, the line is getting murkier, but it's disappearing. So we have, again, under Obama, more of the same in these important respects. Now, Ron Paul is running as a Republican. Many people think that he shouldn't run as a Republican because his platform is somewhat different from the mainstream Republican platform, thank goodness. But he's doing what he has to do. He's tried running as a libertarian in years gone by, it doesn't work. The system is geared to be a two-party system, which we will discuss later. And so he's doing what he has to do to have a shot at becoming president and getting these principles that we care about, peace, civil rights, and let's say a fair economic system, into the executive of this nation. So he's doing what he has to do running as a Republican, and the argument of this article was, even if you have spent years arguing or with your friends about how much the Republican Party stunk under George Bush, and indeed you may go back a few administrations before that, you didn't like the religious right, all of these things that I don't like either. And so you have, as it were, some cognitive dissonance going over to the dark side, understandable. I'm saying, well, now is time. And because perhaps you don't want to say I'm a proud Republican, very understandable, you probably need another name. So I said, call yourselves Blue Republicans. So it's clear that you're becoming a Republican for a purpose. You're in the party, but perhaps not of the party. And why blue? Because blue in this country is the Democrat colour, is the colour of liberalism. America's unique in that, of course. It's the other way around everywhere. So Blue Republican, and this took off. And I have there's a few people to thank for that. When this article came out, I think it was a Friday afternoon, and the likes on Facebook started going up at a huge rate. And I think it came out on a Friday, and by Sunday or Monday it had been shared 11,000 times just on Facebook. And at the beginning of that process, I had a call from a gentleman in Colorado, a guy called Israel Anderson, who's been very involved in the Ron Paul movement for quite some time. And he had the foresight to say, I think this article will start a political movement. And I was like, okay, sounds good, yeah. And he said, so I bought the domain, Blue Republican, and .org, and the Facebook group, I'm going to set it up right now. How about it? And I said, well, let's try. So we did, and it looks like Blue Republican is a meme, and the rest, as one says, is history, and of course it's led me here to you now. Going forward, thanks. Now the article, I think there are a few reasons why the article worked. I might be wrong about these, but this is what I'm thinking, you know, like looking back at what happened there. It was written, obviously, for the audience of the Huffington Post. I had them in mind. I come from that kind of, I have that sensibility myself, a liberal sensibility, which is that we want social justice, we want economic justice. So obviously the purpose of policy is to deliver those. And so if you want those things, you have to legislate them. That basically is the fundamental assumption of the left. It turns out that it doesn't work that way. And I'm going to explore why it doesn't work that way. And in doing that, I want to convince you that the mainstream left of this country, and indeed of the, for what it's worth, the social democracies around Europe and the rest of the world, don't have the answers. They may have had, if you go back 40 or 50 or 60 years ago, some of the arguments that are being made on the left seemed reasonable on the surface, but now we've got data that we didn't have before. And the case I want to make is that what Ron Paul actually wants to do, what he understands, is going to get us to liberal outcomes, good liberal intentions, more effectively than any other mainstream candidate, including Barack Obama. One of the reasons I think this particular argument in this article was successful, the article was called "If You Love Peace, Become a Blue Republican Just for a Year," is that I started off by affirming those liberal principles, agreeing with my readers that their moral intentions are good, they're right, and they do not have to be abandoned. Now, in libertarianism, which does, libertarianism is a word that's used here a lot in this country, it's not used anywhere else very much, and unfortunately has a massive branding problem. Nobody, in bringing people to see the argument I want to make, if they feel that they end up having to call themselves libertarian, that's just not going to work. People don't want to identify with that because they don't want to be one of those kooks at the end of the road. Just like they don't want to be Republicans if they were perhaps Democrats or independents who supported Obama. So you can't call them libertarian, so you need another name. And Blue Republican provides the name. Now you might say, well, why not just call yourselves Democrats for Ron Paul? There's been the Democrats for Ron Paul movement for quite some time. But it hasn't created quite the same stir. Excuse me. And I think that's because a Democrat for Ron Paul, the name implies that we're still good with the party system. We're still Democrats. But people who are starting to understand the arguments that I've been making in my writing on the Huffington Post, they're aware that the fundamental problem is the system itself. It's the donkey-elephant game. It's the fact that if you identify as a Democrat or you identify as a Republican, as the mainstream of those parties define them, the first thing you're buying into is that game. And it's a game in which both sides, who like to pretend that they disagree, agree on all the things that actually matter. It turns out that they agree on all of the things that have brought America to its current point of crisis, and some of them are here. And I would like to, this is kind of like an overarching summary, and it's quite simple. I want to make the case that the politics of the left, and I capitalize them like that. I'm talking mainstream, I'm talking Democrats and Republicans. And fear are what have got America to its current point. And there's a bunch of them. And any one of them is terrifying. And George Bush, of course, was responsible for taking the country in this direction. Obama is responsible for taking the country in this direction. But it's not really about two bad men, Obama and George Bush. It is the system. It's not actually that these are men with evil intent. I don't believe that for a minute. It is perhaps that they don't understand the mechanisms of the system enough to know that the only way to solve these problems, to stop this huge momentum, this inertia towards a takedown of economic rights, of civil rights, of peace, requires an actual change of the system. It requires quite a radical view that, in my opinion, Ron Paul is right now closest to by a mile. So here's a few. Let's consider the banking system we have. Now, we have a monetary system that systematically transfers wealth from productive citizens to financial institutions. This injustice is compounded by the fact that political elites bail out financial elites when they manage to lose money even in the system which makes their business a risk-free business. Crony corporatism and, let's say, big government feed off each other. They depend on each other. And I'm going to talk a lot about that later. Related to that, government spending is unconstrained. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, there's too much government spending and I'm being hyperbolic. When I say unconstrained, I actually mean as a matter of the way our monetary system works, there is no constraint on government spending. And I'm going to explain that because most people in this country, probably 99.99%, think that the government needs revenue to spend. The government does not need anything to spend. The government creates money when it spends it, and that has huge consequences. So I'm going to talk about that, and that word economic totalitarianism is a little dramatic, but I will explain it later. So I've already touched on cronyism, this favoritism, again, between, let's say, our leaders, those with their hands on the levers of state power, and those who concentrate wealth. Privacy. Fundamental right, Fourth Amendment, you don't have any privacy now. You have no privacy now. You do not have any because of what Bush did, and Obama did nothing to reverse it. In fact, has made it worse. The obvious example is the Patriot Act. There now are people under that legislation listening to private conversations of yours. They do not need a warrant. There's hundreds of these people in offices, and all of your communications are being routed through, or routed through, if I were to be speaking British English. See, I'm making it fit, routed through. Let's see. And also terrifyingly, you have obviously constitutional protection against having your house searched without a judicial oversight. You no longer have that thanks to the Patriot Act, brought to you by Bush, extended by Obama. Some people are quite fine with the TSA. I'm not. I think it's unnecessary. I don't think it works. But whatever you think about that, it raises questions about your constitutional protections. Financial privacy, this one is one that particularly bugs me. I have no financial privacy as a Brit in America. And the reason is I have a bank account that isn't American. It's in a foreign country. And if I do not declare to the Treasury on a particular form where my bank accounts are and how much money I have in them, I commit a crime. Completely against the Fourth Amendment in the way that I read it. And that is the case, even though I obviously declare honestly my income. So this is not about tax returns. This is about the government wants to know every hour of the day where my economic resources are. And now there's something that's particularly dark. The financial criminal enforcement network. I've got that. Something like that. All of the American banks are a part of this. And they get to issue suspicious activity reports, that's SARS. Right? If ever you do something with your bank account that's a little unusual. So if you go to the bank tonight and deposit $5,000, they have to tell the government that you did it. They have to supply that data. Due process, of course, has gone with the National Defense Authorization Act. I didn't think they could beat the Patriot Act. They beat the Patriot Act. The National Defense Authorization Act, of course, was absolutely fantastic because it won the war on terror by removing all of the freedoms that are the cause of the terrorists trying to kill us. So, round of applause for our congressman. We're now assassinating American citizens. I understand that there may be a good case. I understand that there may be a sense in which there can be oversight that results in the processing of an executive order to kill somebody. I can imagine it, but it obviously raises such massive questions, again, about the civil rights of everybody else, that if it doesn't demand a prime time speech by the president on the TV, I don't know what does. So the questions that's raised, not just by the killing, but by the fact that now it's so brazen that they don't even have to answer for it, disturbs me greatly. I think it's a marker for the direction that we're moving in. Militarism. Our Department of Defense have run extraordinary studies that have concluded that most of the suicide, 95, actually over 95% of the suicide terrorism against the United States is the result of the presence of American military assets in the countries of the people that would terrorize us, the countries that they perceive to be their homeland in some way. That's why, for example, we've been attacked by suicide terrorists from Saudi Arabia, but not from Sudan or Iran, which also have huge Islamo-fascist, as some of the anti-144 people would call it, elements. So the Department of Defense, their own studies show that blowback is very real. So please don't believe me on that. Go to YouTube, type in Robert Pape, or Robert Pape, Department of Defense, and he was the guy that headed up this study. It has profound implications for Ron Paul's foreign policy. I'm not going to actually talk about what Ron Paul believes very much because it's so easy to find out, especially now during campaign season. So if it's not clear why what I'm telling you here leads me to Ron Paul, you can go away afterwards and I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader, as they say in textbooks. But the reason I support Ron Paul's foreign policy is because I believe it will make us safer. Militarism doesn't. We're in, what, I don't know what the number is now, it keeps going up. We're in 150 countries now with our military assets, I think that's the number. It's about 3/4 of the world, American military assets. Truth is crime. If anybody hasn't read 1984, George Orwell's 1984, big plug and all that, now is a good time in American history to read it. In this country, you can commit a crime by telling the truth. If under the Patriot Act, a warrant that is written by a federal agent without judicial review is served against you, and you tell somebody you've committed a crime, you may not tell anybody that that has happened. And I mentioned the FinCEN, the Criminal Enforcement Network, or whatever it's called, Financial Enforcement Network. When they issue a suspicious activity report about your financial activities, if you actually say, I've just deposited $8,000 or whatever in cash in my account, are you going to run a suspicious activities report? Are you going to send that to the government? If they tell you that they have, even if they have, they've committed a crime. Truth is crime in this country now. First Amendment, anyone? And just to make the obvious point that I'm probably going to make many times, none of the above is constitutional. And indeed, Jim Clyburn said in, I think it's a kind of moderately famous interview with Judge Napolitano, well, most of what we do here is unconstitutional, referring to the Hill, of course. So I'm not here to tell you I've told you what's wrong, so it's so obvious, this stuff. I mean, it's so obvious, I'm not going to keep hammering it. I don't want to sound like a politician. Rather, what I want to do is get us to think about what's wrong with the way that we think about politics. What is it that we don't see that enables us to sit by and let this be done to us? We've got to, because at the end of the day, without that, none of these bad things can be done. Now, in this talk, in very blue Republican outreach spirit, I'm going to quote a hero of the left, who I often agree with, and a hero of the right, whom I often agree with. Hero of the left is Noam Chomsky, and I'm going to quote him right now. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of debate. So my talk is going to be about the presuppositions of the system. Everything that left and right agree about. You don't know what they don't talk about what they agree about. That's all assumed, usually silently and implicitly. You're too distracted, usually as a country, by what they're disagreeing about, because the disagreement kind of sends the message that that's what the issues are. No, the real issues are the things that have been assumed for oh too long by the mainstream left and right in this country. So let's talk about a little bit about this left-right system we have in the US. Excuse me. So we have a two-party system. So America is just one party away from a single-party totalitarian state. Fair point? We're only one party away. It's actually quite, I'm joking a little bit, but it's a very American situation. It doesn't exist really anywhere else. A two-party system in which there really are there's one game in town and there are only two players. And having a system like this means it's easy if I'm a Republican to get your vote by sufficiently demonizing the other team. Because if I can demonize them, I'm the only place left you can go. And both sides do it. Now, even in other democracies like Britain, where we have a robust first-past-the-post democratic system like in the US that results in a robust government, i.e. we do not have proportional representation, we still nevertheless have other parties that are significant. So if you can't, there's not just two parties, one that stakes out the left and one that stakes out the right, and if you don't like one, you have to go to the other. And that's good, because it means that there aren't really any default political positions. And it also means that this filter of left and right is much less strong, which means people can think a little more, I'm not saying they do think much more creatively about politics, but they certainly can. And politics seems a little bit less like, two football teams going at it, as it often does here, between Democrats and Republicans. One of the ways this is manifest, I think, in American culture, and I think this is something that strikes a lot of Europeans, is if you start to get to know somebody, you're sitting in a bar and you ask them what they think about, choose any two topics, let's say taxation and abortion. Once you know what they think about that, you, with 90% accuracy, can work out what they think about everything else. Because you only need those two data points to find out what team they're in. Once you know what team they're in, Democrat or Republican, you have all the rest. So this is a way that that I think this two-party system, this Republican donkey elephant system, tends to stop us thinking creatively in the field of politics and seeing what it is we really need to see. Because, of course, if you can only see through a Democratic and a Republican lens, and they agree implicitly on so much, as we'll see that they do, there's so much that matters, then what's going to prompt you to question the real substrate of our political and economic system. So now, left and right, let's think a bit about those words. Those words are very subversive. They do amazing things on us, I think. What are left and right? Left and right are directions in space, right? Everything is either left or right. There's nothing that isn't left or right. If I draw a line here, if I go left, I've covered all space there. If I go right, I've covered all space there. Between the two, I've covered all space. So we have this illusion when we use these terms, I think subconsciously, that if you hear from somebody of the left, and you hear from somebody of the right, that you've heard all there is to hear about a topic, because you've covered all the political space. It's clearly not true, right? And so which is why the fairness doctrine and CNN having a Republican and a Democrat want to discuss a debate is really going to inform you that much about a debate that's that big, whilst giving you the impression that you've covered that space. That's the point. And the other thing about left and right is that they're opposite. So again, you have this illusion, right? If you tell me of the left and you tell me of the right, what you're really telling me is that you oppose each other. And if I'm going to listen to you with that filter, that I'm listening to two people who oppose each other, then I am not going to see all the things you're not talking about, that you agree about. And again, the reason this country is shot is that all of those things on that earlier slide have been given to you by the left and the right over generations. Not just one. Now, the left and right are also symmetrical terms, and I'm going to leave that until later to describe what I mean. And understanding what that means, I'm going to suggest later, is going to be a key to getting out of this left-right thinking, and basically, voting with the same old party with the same old account of how America is and how we need to solve these problems. So now, there are lots of things that are easy to see wrong with this country. But at the bottom of them all are our economic system. And I write quite a lot about this on Huffington Post. Because liberals are rightly concerned with economic justice. And economic justice and social justice, of course, play off against each other. And historically, progressivism has been about redressing balances. We do things at the bottom with welfare, we do things at the top with taxation. What I want to show is that the reason it doesn't work is because what you're really doing there is dealing with the symptoms. You need to cure the disease. The body is riddled with the disease, we need to cure the disease. But the left hasn't understood the disease. And indeed the right, the mainstream right, hasn't either. People who are coming to Ron Paul are starting to understand what that disease is. And so I want to make the case that you need to understand a lot of what would be called classical liberal ideas, and indeed just understand the facts of our system, how our monetary system works, to really work out, if you care about economic justice and not having an increasing number of poor people, if you really want to deal with that, and i.e. if you have liberal sensibility, you actually want to solve the problem rather than just support what progressive means that don't deliver on progressive ends. Oh, sorry, let me go back. So to open the mind to what I'm about to tell you, here's a few quotes from people inside the monetary system. Rothschild, that's a name you would have heard. Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. Okay, so monetary system probably pretty important. They who control the credit of the nation direct the policy of government and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people. If you're a principled liberal, you have to care about that. The Bank of England. And one that's really going to kind of, I think, hit the point home. Here's one from Hemphill, who is the credit manager of the Federal Reserve Bank in Georgia. When one gets a complete grasp of the picture that I hope to elucidate in a minute, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless situation is almost incredible. But there it is. Well, there it is, only because we haven't voted for Ron Paul yet to sort it out, but let's go. Now, this is going to be an economics lesson. This slide's an economics lesson. It's technical. It might even get a little bit mathematical. So please bear with me. It gets easier after this, right? How is money created? Now, libertarians think they know about this, and a lot of them know a lot more than others. But I find that a lot of people have kind of half the picture. There's really two ways money is created. Money is created by banks, and money is created by government. Now, the reason liberals, I think, need to understand this is because this mechanism is what systematically disenfranchises the poor and makes certain that progressive means like welfare and progressive taxation will not solve the problems that we have in this country. Most American money is created by banks as debt, like this. Man walks into a bank, says, I have a house, I would like a loan, please. How much? $100,000. They type $100,000 into the computer. $100,000 has now been created as an asset in that man's bank account. At the same time, a $100,000 liability to the bank has been created. So there's no net gain in wealth at this point, right? There's new money, but there's also new debt. No net gain in financial assets. But what else is created at the same time? An obligation to pay back interest. So let's say that the obligation really is to pay back $200,000 over time. So we've created a $200,000 obligation on $100,000 of assets. How does the man pay that back over time? There's only two ways. He goes and does productive labor, making things, making the life of this country better. And then he takes the economic results of that labor and he gives them to the bank to pay off the interest. The bankers who, by the way, aren't producing anything directly. If he can't do that, they come for his assets, real assets. Productive labor is a real asset, but real asset might be a house. So in this way, over time, our system systematically transfers money from working Americans to people who get a special license under the government. So there is no operation of financial elites that does not involve government allowing this system, right? What we're doing is transferring the wealth of those people, of working Americans, to those financial elites. In other words, the 1%, 99% problem we have is built into the system. It's always been inevitable. And this is the reason why, for example, since 1993 through 2007, half of all of the economic growth of this nation has gone to that top 1%. And I'm pleased that the occupiers of Wall Street are out there bothered about it, because they should be. The important thing is they have to know why it happened. At the same time, you can look at the bottom 40% of this nation, who now own under the system only 0.3% of American assets. 0.3% of American assets are in the hands of the poorest 40% of people in this country. It was nearly half this country. The top 1% again own more than 100 times as many assets. Well, of course they do, because they're closer to the top of this financial system that systematically moves real wealth to the top, to the manipulators of money under government license. But the really crazy thing is, remember when this $100,000 of money was created, $200,000 of obligation was created? Where does the extra $100,000 come from to get paid back over time? There's only one way. Some other American somewhere has to go into debt before the second $100,000 is due. To create that $100,000, it's also going to be paid back to the bank. So at all times, there's more debt obligation than there is actual money. So we are therefore a nation of economic serfs. That's built into the system. No liberal could be happy with that. There's no point wanting to adjust the welfare rolls, wanting to tweak the taxation system. If you leave this in place, Ron Paul gets this, Obama, Bush, and all the rest of them don't. Collectively, we're always in debt, and as soon as we decide to not go any more into debt, the thing stops. We have collapse. Again, the collapse is built in, the coming collapse is always built into the system. It's like, I don't know what it is, like musical chairs, you know. You're always about to lose. So this depends on inflation. This system depends on the inflation of the monetary supply, which depends on people choosing to go into debt. And of course, inflation always hurts those without assets the most. So here's a double whammy. Because the people who don't have assets, the people at the bottom of the economic pile. The people who are getting those welfare checks. So we're again economically disenfranchising them by this system. The only way to protect yourself against the system is to own assets, of course, which go up in price when priced against the dollars that are falling in value as they're created as more people go into debt. Okay, I've done enough of how banks create money. However, there's another way that money is created. The government creates money. And we've heard a lot about recently about, oh, they're printing money and they're printing money. Actually, quantitative easing isn't really printing money. That's not the problem. The problem is every time the government spends, they're printing money. If you go to a tax office and you pay your $1,000 in tax in cash, they don't go and put it in a government bank account. The government doesn't need money because it makes the money. It issues the currency. It shreds it, right? It shreds it. The idea that the government needs tax revenue to spend out of course it's stupid. Think about it. If you could make money, well, you wouldn't work, would you? It wouldn't matter how much you had in the bank because you just make money when you spend it. And indeed, that's how the economies of all economies, I think all economies in the world work. So we have a fiat money system it's a government monopoly. Now, how is this government monopoly maintained? It's maintained because we do have a tax system, and the reason we have the tax system, the real reason we have the tax system, is to create the demands for the dollars. If you had no tax system, why would you use them? You'd use something else. You would get to choose. So this is why I say it's a kind of system of economic totalitarianism. If you wanted to make yourself the king of an island, you turned up in an island and there was 100 people already there doing quite well, and you wanted to take control of them and of their assets. All you have to do is make them trade in money that only you can issue. And once you've done that, you can have whatever you want. You can afford to implement whatever policy you want. Now this is really subversive. The problem isn't that, and Ron Paul, I mean, he has the shorthand saying the country's insolvent. Technically, he's actually wrong. The country can't be insolvent. It's always going to print money to pay its bills. It's never going to not be able to pay its bills. The problem is that it can't be insolvent. So it can keep making mistakes and distort the economy until the actual working economy is so destroyed, and it's directed not by the free choices of the people, but you have bad policies that are just infinitely funded and never retracted, because there is no mechanism, of course, to retract the policies of the bad policies of a growing government when they don't work. This monetary system also is not constitutional. And also, it's not capitalism. There's nothing capitalist about the system, of course not. If the money is controlled in this totalitarian fashion and can be printed under special license by bankers and by the government itself, this is not a free market. It's the opposite of a free market. Right, so that was the economics lesson. This is the funkiest slide that follows on from it. Government has corrupted the corporations by corporatist lawmaking. And the corporations, especially the banks, corrupt the government by financing the people who have their hands on the levers of power. It is not in the interest of corporations, especially banks under the system, that politicians stay within the confines of the Constitution. Of course not, because if they're confined by the Constitution, then I as a banker can't buy what I want. I can't buy my seat at the table, like the pharmaceuticals companies had when they sat at the table with Bush, or like the healthcare industry had when they sat at the table with Obama, as when we were coming up with Obamacare. And because of this fiat monetary system that allows the government to always create money that it spends, you can afford warfare. You can afford infinite warfare. You can also afford infinite welfare. Because you're never going to feel, as the people of this country, as taxpayers, you're never going to feel the immediate economic pain. You're not going to feel immediately the economic consequences of a decision to spend $1 trillion killing innocent people in Iraq. just gets, the money supply increases, comes back later. It comes back in this system, this highly non-progressive system, this highly illiberal system that makes the poor poorer and moves the wealth to the top. I gave you some figures for the richest 1% of people in this country. We have the same system in the UK, where even the welfare system is so much bigger than it is here. We've really gone down that road of social democracy. In 1976, the bottom 50% of Brits owned 12% of the assets, of British assets. Now they own less than 1%. It always works the same way. It works at the level of the corporations too. There are 43,000 transnational corporations on the planet, give or take. 40% of all wealth held by transnationals or controlled by transnationals is held by less than 1%, 417. And what kind of corporations do you think they are? Well, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are high on the list. Now, things actually get even more troubling, I think, for principled liberals. Because this system is so inherently unfair, so inherently illiberal. And the data are now in that we can see that the real effect of welfare is negative, right? Welfare has not given us what it was built to give us. It hasn't actually delivered opportunity and economic justice to working and poor Americans. It hasn't provided safety. Because we've decapitalized them. In decapitalizing them under the system, they have no means with which to exercise, to do anything with any economic opportunity. Capital, equity in society, that's what you take advantage of opportunities with. If you don't have any kind of wealth at all, if you're being systematically decapitalized, then your outlook is bad. But if we give you just a trickle, just so you can subsist, we can keep you off the street, can't we? We can keep you off the street, which actually reinforces the system. So I would even make the case that if you're a principled liberal, you've got to start thinking, well, actually, not only may my the means, the political means that I've been supporting, be failing by their original intent, they may actually be taking this country further away. Okay. Oh yeah, and of course, this system is not only favourable to the corporations that get to buy seats at the table, it's favourable to big government because it gives them this, this room to move, this infinite economic room to move, to make whatever policies they want. And of course, what drives the policies that they make? Welfare is a great policy, isn't it, if you're a politician, because though it's going to guarantee you the votes of everyone who's going to get the check that you're supporting, that you want to send out. So this strange monetary system where government and a particular financial class depend on each other is what's doing the damage. And there's nothing liberal about it. And there is no tax rate and there is no welfare system that will put this right. So I've said before that we need to treat, if you're again, principled liberal, you need to treat the disease and not the symptoms. It's like, many of you may know this, but the, what is it now? It's just gone over 15% of Americans are on food stamps. 15%. And that program is administered by JP Morgan. And they're making a profit, little more profit every time somebody else goes on food stamps. Now, I don't have a problem with the government getting a company like JP Morgan doing it honestly and openly, and not as a result of lobbying, to deliver an essential service, probably much more cheaply and efficiently than the government can. But it is like a strange metaphor, isn't it? Now, I guess to reinforce the point. Since 1973, excuse me, in real terms, the wages of a skilled American worker have not risen. Now, all of these statistics, all of these consequences of the monetary system, of this unfair, unjust economic system that we have, should actually be obvious. None of this should be a surprise. Because if there are grandparents in the room, you can probably remember the day when raising a child on a single income was very doable. And now it's almost not doable. For most people, it isn't doable at all. So what's happened? We've made huge advances in social rights and civil rights, to be sure, over the last few generations. And certainly there are people on the left that we can thank and must thank for that. But let's think about, for example, just to take an example, if you are a mother and you want to work, you now have a much better chance of finding a job that you actually want to do and getting a fair wage, a wage that's equal to that of a man, which of course is great. We all celebrate that progress. But what now if you're a mother who doesn't want to work? Where's that option? Well, you've got a new option. You've lost an option. It's not clear now that you've actually gained. What I want to say is that, again, if you're liberal, you have to start asking the question, has this corrupt economic system, a system, again, which left and right and all of the current candidates support, except one Paul. Can the system stay? Can the system stay? So I'm going to go to one more example. I want to talk about, I'm in a university, let's talk about student loans. This one kind of touches me a bit because I see hundreds of resumes of people who want to work for a Watch America, my voluntary organisation. I get sent all these resumes, usually people who want to be editors, they want to edit news articles, political pieces or whatever. And I see many resumes, pretty most of them have a grade point average of in the high 3s, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9. And I am now getting resumes, I can think of one, someone who had a 3.9 GPA in international relations and a master's degree, who did not know how to use an apostrophe. Didn't know. Not her fault. Actually, I called her up and I said, great resume, you sent me this, not one apostrophe used correctly. And she was like, yeah, I've never been taught that. Now, the reason I say that is just because I just want to make the point that I would say there's been perhaps a huge decline in educational standards in this country. But let's say I'm wrong. Let's just say there hasn't been a huge increase.
You can say that.
Okay, thank you. Right, good. Thank you. So yeah, that's my feeling, and not just in the US, but obviously I'm talking about the US. But one thing that's special to the US is inflation in education is unbelievable. It's astronomical. I mean, it's bigger than healthcare inflation, and the inflation across all sectors in this country. Education inflation. Why are students having to basically take themselves into a very severe form of kind of economic serfdom before they even start their lives to get this education? They're paying so much more. Why aren't the standards going up? The reason they're paying so much more is, again, because of the dangers of what one might say simplistic progressive means to deal with, to make social improvements. Now, obviously, the intention of getting more people who have the mind to go through to further education, to enable them to get to further education, that's a good intention. None of us are happy to see that. But the corporations, and look now for the government corporation access here, right, especially financial corporations, are guaranteed that when they lend the money to a student, they won't lose it. It is a risk-free business under special license of your big government, right? And this is the kind of thing that typically is supported by those of liberal sensibility in one speaking. Well, that's good. Let's make sure those students can afford to go to school. But the problem is, if you're administering a school, and you know whatever price you set, that money can be found, because that student can borrow it, because the lenders to the student are guaranteed to get their money back, you're going to hike the prices. Again, it's predictable, and it's happening, and now we're getting to a point where students have to start saying, well, maybe this policy is having the opposite effect, because students are now saying, is this education worth this debt? In my experience, on the other side of the desk, as it were, looking at the resumes, the education isn't worth the debt. So it raises again this question, are traditionally liberal means, let's say more mainstream Democrat, and in some cases even Republican means, delivering us these things that we care about if we have liberal sensibility? They're not. Now, so I painted a pretty dire picture, and I'm halfway through, so here's the second half. It's almost hopeless, isn't it? It's almost hopeless. We have no civil rights, everything's getting worse, we have a corrupt monetary system, all is true. Why did I bother coming to Idaho? The reason is because there is a little hope here, and only here in America, I think. I unfortunately don't have this hope for the continent that I come from, or indeed the country I come from, which is very sad. I'm English, I love Britain. We've gone further down the road in many ways than you guys have.
Why not?
Say it?
Why don't you update?
I'll do that for questions, if I may. Yeah, I'd love to answer that. But let me say why I do have a bit more faith in America and what sets America apart. and why I'm excited to be here and why I kind of tear up a little bit and get really emotional and get passionate about this in America and non-poor. I'm going to start with telling you a little anecdote, so if you're sitting comfortably. I was in a traffic jam on LA Freeway back in about 2005, 2006, listening to a radio interview on NPR with a gentleman called Greg Palast, who is an American liberal journalist who moved to England because he felt his very good journalism wasn't getting the coverage that it deserved in the US, on the cable networks and in the newspapers here. And it was a good move. And he got to England and his career quickly took off. And he's now, I don't know, I haven't kind of checked recently, but he became a BBC correspondent, and I think a correspondent for The Guardian, obviously a liberal newspaper. And he made a career, and he's written some great books that again, for a liberal audience, liberals would like The Best Democracy Money Could Buy, which exposed a lot of corruption in the election of George Bush, and so on and so forth. And he was being interviewed on this radio show. And the host said, "You just had a couple of newborn children, Greg. Do you want to bring them up in Britain, or do you want to bring them up in the United States?" And his answer was really interesting, and I think I agree with him. He says, "Well, this is the decision I have to make," he said in answering the question. In Europe, everybody's being screwed by the politicians, by the elites. And they're a bit less ignorant than the Americans. They actually know they're being screwed. But in Europe, they don't care, because they expect to be screwed by rich people and powerful people. And they get on with their daily lives, and they kick back and have their beer and sit on the beach or whatever it is. Get on with their lives. In America, there is some truth in this stereotype that Americans tend not to see what's in front of them, perhaps, because they don't leave the country, they don't have reference points, they're perhaps a little too comfortable at home. But there's another reason why Americans may be, and he said this as an American, I'm just describing to you what he said, maybe a little more naive in some respects than the Europeans. And that's because Americans get angry when they're being done in, when they're being hurt, when they're being ripped off. And so there's a much greater vested interest in the United States to hide from Americans what's going on. And the most of it, I would say, is what I've already shown you, but there's obviously a lot more. And now we're finding all the time a lot more corruption that we are being the victims of. Because, of course, this corporate state axis that is supported by mainstream politicians of both sides that have benefited from it for generations, it impoverishes us, and it reduces our liberty. And we don't like it when we notice that we're being fooled. If you're going to fool me, don't treat me like a fool and show me that you think I'm a fool. Then let me know that you're stealing from me. Right? And Americans get a bit more angry. So there's maybe more effort made not to show what's going on. Well, the good news is now Americans they're starting to see it, and they're getting angry, and Greg Palast was right. In 2009, I mean, this speaks to your question, but I'll expand on it. In 2009, on the 1st of December, the Lisbon Treaty came into force in Europe, the EU, or the EU SSR, as people like me like to call it. And on that day, 27 sovereign nations were effectively eliminated. And they were eliminated by a constitution that, whenever it had been put to the vote in Europe, had been voted down by the people that it was imposed upon. That's the rise of tyranny in Europe. But here we're getting angry. We're getting angry. Nobody on that day, by the way, marched in any city, in any country in Europe. But we're getting angry here. And I don't care if you're on the left and you're out in the Occupy movement, or you're on the right and you're in the Tea Party. I don't care what half of the picture you see. I think you need to see the other half. But I'm glad you care enough. Americans care a little bit. There's something in the blood here. England is much more apathetic politically, much more apathetic than the United States. And indeed, when we have political debates like we're doing now in the US, it gets a little exciting. It gets exciting because people, whatever your colour, Democrat, or Republican, left, right, Libertarian, Constitutionalist, whatever it may be, political debates here are a bit philosophical. At least we talk about freedom. At least we talk about tyranny. And maybe we have simplistic notions, superficial notions, but we get the idea that the politicians are the people with the power to affect these fundamental things. And we talk about them. They're out in the debate. In England, the spectrum of political debate is, do we spend a little bit more money on the National Health Service, or do we spend a lot more money on the National Health Service? It's a completely different thing. And obviously now we're in interesting times. For two main reasons. We have there's a catalyst for this now. One is that it's hurting. The results of a lot of what I've already discussed, they're coming home. You know, we're starting to feel the pinch. It's hurting economically. And for those with their eyes open, and with ears to hear, we are also hurting in terms of our civil rights. We don't like that. That's one reason why now is a crucial time. But there's another reason. Of course, it's like this accident of presidential history. We had Bush, we went far in one direction, and we thought we were going to get change far in the other direction. So we had a massive expectation. That's why I supported Obama. I was hoping for the change. Right? I might not have known what it was going to be quite, but I knew I wanted it, and I knew that if it wasn't Bush, it couldn't be worse, right? Because we've gone so far. And indeed, many of the reasons now, of course, that I'm arguing for Ron Paul is that I'm having the same problems with Obama that I'm having with Bush. But again, just to reiterate the point, I don't really think this is about the men or their bad intentions. This is a system. This is a system with a massive inertia that takes a radical who's prepared to talk and do systemic change to actually undo the damage. And of course, the most important thing of all is you have the Constitution, and it is sublime, and no, it isn't outdated because of what it does and what it is. No other country has it. What is the Constitution? To me, the reason I don't think it's a leftist or a rightist document is just this kind of, you know, sublime invention of the mind of some very important and smart men. It's the Hippocratic Oath for politicians. All it says is first do no harm. Now, if that isn't a liberal and a conservative principle at the same time, I don't know what is. So to me, the Constitution, which says do no harm, transcends left and right. It transcends the boxes that are keeping us, you know, looking at what ails us in this country in this very, you know, in these very narrow filters. It is the built-in solution. Oh, and we talk about constitutional conservatives. Why don't we talk about constitutional liberals? I mean, if you actually look at the Bill of Rights, if that isn't a profoundly beautiful liberal document, I don't know what is. And you know, one of my articles, I even, you know, it didn't take off like a Republican, but I started talking about constitutional liberals. You know, where are you? Identify yourselves. You know, we need liberals to be pushing the Constitution. Let's have the arguments about national healthcare on a constitutional basis. Let me hear the liberal constitutional argument for national healthcare. It would be a very tough sale, but let's do it. Fair enough. It's a liberal document. And interestingly, and I put a question mark by this. I don't think the last time I gave this talk they really bought it. And I have to do a lot more reading of American history to be sure about it. But I'm not sure the founders thought of themselves as progressives. They made this liberal document. I'm not sure they didn't think of themselves as conservatives, because they were conserving something that had come down through an Anglo tradition, common law, basic rights. They came to the United States. Oh, let's say that, I mean, go back to the Pilgrims. You know, those who have come to the United States haven't come to do something that's never been done before. Not because they had some completely new idea. They came here because they were leaving a place that already had the idea of freedom and civil rights and economic rights. But at that time there was a tyranny, an institutionalized tyranny, that wasn't giving it to them. So really they were conserving what they deserved. And in conserving that, they produced a liberal document. American exceptionalism all sounds a bit silly to people on the left, and it did to me for many years. I mean, you know, why is America better just because it's America? Well, it isn't better just because it's America, obviously. But there is something that makes America exceptional, and it is related to what's on this slide. The idea that liberty, that freedom, that your fundamental right is to be left alone. The idea that that precedes politics, that liberty isn't just a good to be weighed up with other social goods. I think that is exceptionally American. And it's not clear that, let's say if you were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it wasn't clear that maybe the Europeans weren't right, the Social Democrats weren't right. Maybe liberty just is another good, just to be weighed up with other things like justice, you know, other things that we want to see in our society. Maybe even equality, you know, things like this. But it turns out that as a method, it turns out that your political method determines outcomes more than the intention that you put into the law. Progressivism has been about good intentions, but it's not been about effective outcomes. And I think this old American idea that liberty really precedes politics, that the moral burden is on the person of whatever political persuasion who would take away your liberty for some good. Right? The moral burden has to be on him. And of course, another obvious one, but having competitive government, what a fantastic notion. Setting the states against each other and against the federal government, also very unique to the USA. And I know states' rights has a history here, but I think it might be time to think again about the huge potential upside in taking advantage of that wisdom of the founders. So, yeah, I sometimes talk about the idea that left and right is symmetrical. Left and right is symmetrical. If you're a chemist or a mathematician or a physicist, you have an idea of what I mean by symmetrical. Two things that are symmetrical describe the same thing. And you can describe one in terms of the other. There's some mapping from one to the other. Left and right are the same kind of thing. I mean, they're both directions in space, they're both ends of a political spectrum. So we think if you're of the left and you're doing politics, you're doing the same thing as someone who's on the right doing politics. You're not. This was a big aha moment for me, and I've tried to write about this, because I think this might be key to getting people on the left to shake hands with people on the right, and vice versa, and find something that they can do together that does not require them compromising their principles. And if we can do that, the game changes in this country and in the world. Here's the thing. Here's what I think. This was my aha moment. I'm now not talking about devoted socialists and devoted neocons and devoted religious right, devoted Marxists. These people are committed in their illiberality. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking of mainstream Brits, mainstream Americans, most people, just common sense, just trying to get on, who just give a basic damn about their fellow countrymen. So I'm talking about moderate left and moderate right. As I've said already in this talk, the moderate left, the politics of the left is the politics of good intention. If you're basically of the left, if you're of liberal persuasion, as I certainly would have said I was before I came to understand what I've been talking about, you do the common sense thing. You think, well, the point of policy of government is obviously to make society better. So you've got to work out, what's good. Obviously, more social justice is good, more economic justice is good. So that's what you want to legislate. So good policy is policy that basically legislates that. It's common sense. Hasn't worked out. The data are in. It turns out you can't legislate good intention. Right? But that's the assumption on the left. And that's why, if I'm on the left, and you're on the right, and I disagree with you, and I know what I've put into my policy is good, comes out of good intention, not wanting to see poverty, wanting to see social justice, and you disagree with me and I'm good, you must be bad. So that's the reason, right? But the people on the right aren't bad, because they're not doing the same, they're not playing the same game as the people on the left. People on the right, have you ever noticed this? If you're on the left and you have friends of people on the right, you think probably they're a bit bad, a bit cold, a bit callous. They don't think you're bad, they just think you're deluded. They don't think you're bad, they think you're wrong. Because the politics of the people on the right are the politics of outcomes, the politics of results. And that's because they just don't make the same unstated assumption that policy can actually do the work that the left thinks it can do. And I would say that there's a lesson there from the right, that it turns out that the right were right on that. They might not have been, but if we on the left, I shouldn't say we on the left, because now I'm a classical liberal now. But if people on the left, betraying my roots there, if people on the left are true to their principles, they have to acknowledge it when they don't get those positive outcomes, those moral outcomes, out of well-intended policy. The road to political hell is indeed paved with good intentions. And you can look in any country in the world right now and you will see the same thing. So I'm a physicist, that was how I was trained, so I have to diagrammatize things. This is the left and right of American politics, in my opinion. You see, the conservatives are operating on a right-wrong axis because of their assumptions. The liberals are operating on a good-bad axis. The first axis is functional, the second axis is moral or intentional. Right? You don't have to choose, it's not either or. These things, but again, for the physicists, this is orthogonal. Right? There is such thing as good policy that works. And to find that, you need somebody, some of perhaps the sensibilities of the left, but also some of the knowledge of the right. That's actually classical liberalism. That's actually what I think is the main reason why you have to vote for a report, if you're a principled liberal. Because you'll actually get what it is that you think you want, but then you do indeed want. Again, the liberal means aren't not what is going to give you the good, the moral outcomes. And the only way you can test that is to look at the data. But let's have a debate in terms of the data. Let's actually look at the number of people who've been disenfranchised despite the welfare state. Let's actually see why we have to have, well, we don't have to have these bailouts, but why do we have the bailouts? And what is the impact going to be? Let's all agree, left and right, that we all want to cure this disease. Right? Now, I quoted the hero of the left at the beginning. Here's my hero of the right. And when I say my hero, I mean that I don't mean these are heroes that I have. I mean to the left, Chomsky's a hero. To the right, this man's a hero. But he said something many years ago, this is Milton Friedman, that I think kind of says the whole thing. Let's listen to him.
In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty. And a society that aims first for liberty will not end up with equality, but it will end up with a closer approach to equality than any other kind of system that has ever been developed. Now that conclusion is based both on evidence from history, across history, and also, I believe, on reasoning which, if you try to follow through the implications of aiming first at equality, will become clear. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others. And what ultimately happens when you aim at equality is that A and B decide what C shall do for D. Except that they take a little bit of a commission off on the way.
So, let's have fun with his A, B, C, and D equation. Because he's right. He's right from the left and he's right from the right. If you're an occupier of Wall Street, you can stick Treasury, Federal Reserve, American taxpayer, and Goldman Sachs into that, and you get the Treasury and the Federal Reserve will decide what the American taxpayer will do for Goldman Sachs. And you would have described the situation with it. And you can also say, if let's say you're one of the Tea Party, you might say that the state legislature and public unions in the state are deciding what the state taxpayer will do for public workers. And you'd also be right. But notice what he said was really quite interesting. He wasn't saying you're bad or you're stupid because you want equality and you don't want liberty. He wasn't saying that. In what he said, he was saying, look, equality is a value too. Yeah, I get that. Equality is a value too. But the only way you can test whether your policies are delivering these things that the left care about, are by looking at history. He said that, look at history. So I just say, let's get out of our ideological box. That's why I've entitled this, Blue Republicans and the End of Left and Right. And the great thing about this country is now, a significant minority, and I hope we get to a critical mass, are doing just that. They're working out that we've been brought to this state by left and right, Republican and Democrats. Because all the way along, the left have warned us, talked a lot about the concentration of wealth among financial elites. The right have warned us about the concentration of power among political elites. They're both right to warn us, but in no case have mainstream politicians of either side stopped the other side from going the direction that they wanted. And here we are. So here's my take home, another diagram. This is what we talk about when we say left and right. This is how we divide our country politically, right? There's the Democrats there on the left, and there's the Republicans on the right, and then you have the more extreme types, you have the socialists, maybe even a few communists kicking around, and you have the religious right and the neocons who are pretty extreme to me, and also maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a few fascists somewhere. But we divide left and right. That's our problem. This is a problem in our head, because this is our reality. Once we see that the real division in American politics is this, then we can actually sort it out. So what is the division? The division is between classical liberal and illiberal, i.e., Well, it's described by a man, I don't know if any of you have read Heinlein. He said the human race divides politically into those who want people to be controlled and those who have no such desire. I'm talking about something a little different from that, but it's a good way. I thought it was fun, since the guy was called Heinlein, to take that quote and call this the Heinlein, the proper division between the proper division of American politics. You see, the thing is, everybody above this line, whether you're Democrat or you're Republican, if you're a mainstream party member, you want me, the voter, to buy into your vision of the world, and then go and impose that vision on the country. Ron Paul doesn't want that. Ron Paul knows that doesn't work. And it doesn't work, because the data are in. It might have worked 50 years ago, might have worked. But it doesn't work, the data are in. So the real question is, since it's political method, since it's a political principle that determines the outcome of policy, certainly over time, when you're trying to assess whether a new policy is going to get you where you want to go, don't ask just what the intention is. Right, to help pay for good intentions. No good to say that the intention is good. What's the method? Is the method one of imposition? Because if the method is one of imposition, then it's one of division. People are only divide against each other when they feel that someone somewhere is trying to impose whatever it is that they like or want or believe on them. And then you say stop, and then you have conflict. And it doesn't matter if the person imposing is right or wrong. It doesn't matter if you're right. It just doesn't work. And as I say, the economic data, the social data, they're all in. It hasn't worked. So actually, the real division for me are, the mainstream on the top. The normal people, they're at the top of this line. These are the illiberals. The weird kooks, the Ron Pauls, the Dennis Kuciniches of the world. Right? They're the weird ones. They're the guys that shape the Constitution. They're extremists because they don't want to kill us innocent people in the Middle East, right? They don't believe in bailing out crony corporates. They believe in the Bill of Rights. It's extremist stuff. They're not mainstream. Well, they've got to become the mainstream because the mainstream has to become the bottom of this diagram. Basically, a classical liberal sensibility, which we might call libertarian sensibility, except for the fact that libertarian has a branding problem. And things classical liberal are concerned with liberty and also concerned with love. Now, this is really weird in a political talk. But you see, all policy, all emotion really is rooted in one of two emotions. Love or fear. There's only love or fear. Everything on that first list, every single thing, is driven by fear. We're bailing out banks because we're scared what happens if we don't. Right? We're groping 12-year-old girls at the airport because we're scared of what will happen if we don't. Yeah? We're going to bomb them over there because we're scared that they're going to come over here. Fear, fear, fear. Impose, impose, impose. What does love say? If you love someone, there's one thing you say to them. You say, as you wish. That's what you say to your husband or your wife. You say, as you wish. When you love someone, what you want for them is what they want for themselves. It is no accident, in my opinion, that in the campaign last campaign that Ron Paul ran for 2008, some of his supporters took that revolution word, and pulled out the word love. It's a brilliant logo, right? Of course, because a Ron Paul presidency, understanding this, says, America, as you wish. Ron Paul, for example, is he's pro-life. I'm not. I'm pro-choice. But I'm not scared of that because you see, the thing is, Ron Paul, as for example, someone who's pro-life, I can respect his opinion. He's not going to impose it on me because, in a more fundamental way, Ron Paul is pro-choice. He's going to give me the choice to disagree with him on being pro-life. Well, that's how we should be running our politics. Okay, so I'm just going to finish up now. Most of this slide is just a summary. Don't be surprised, I want to say to my liberal friends, please don't be surprised that Ron Paul is a true conservative. But I'm arguing that we need to choose this man to make the country safe for liberals. It has a precedent. As I said before, what do you think was happening at the foundation of this country? What do you think happened in 1940 when the conservative, royalist, imperialist Winston Churchill saved the world when Britain stood alone against Germany, against fascism, and saved the world, made it safe? We were waiting for you guys, the Americans, to make it safe for liberals thereafter. What world would we be in now if Winston Churchill, the Conservative, hadn't done that? You see, often true conservatism with a small c and true liberalism They come from the same place. They actually do come from the same place. If you actually go back, go on Wikipedia, classical liberalism, and you will see you will see conservatism and liberalism right there. The left, capital L, liberalism, capital L, progressivism, capital L. You know, republicanism, capital R, conservatism, capital C, have bastardized true liberal and conservative principles. But true liberals in this audience have more in common with true conservatives than the people that pretend, make out like they're liberal with a capital L, have with the people who make out like they're conservative. America can come together, and it has to come together. So I will acknowledge that Ron Paul will not give some, let's say, hardcore liberals some of what they want. You know, is it theoretically possible that in a Ron Paul United States, a poor woman in Mississippi would have to cross a state line to get a safe abortion? Because Mississippi passes a law that doesn't let them do it in Mississippi, because Ron Paul doesn't believe the federal government should be in making laws about that. Ron Paul is right, in my opinion. Is that possible? It's possible, it's not likely. But guess what? In that world, people like me will be giving money to the charity that will get that woman across the state line so she can have a safe abortion. And Ron Paul would like to see that going on in this country. So I will live with that because what's at stake here is now so much bigger. Right? The Bill of Rights has gone. It's not about saving it, it's about getting it back. There's only one man even talking about it, and there's certainly only one man with a voting record that suggests that he will do it. We're now taking human life without judicial process. We now have a law that enables you to be locked up by the military in this country. And Bush didn't do it. Obama signed it. What am I talking about? Obama signed that one. NDAA, please. It's desperate. All the lights are flashing red. And only this country has the Bill of Rights. So I'm not American yet, so I'm still an ambassador for the world. So please, for the sake of the world, get this right. Because only you can. And of course, if we do succeed, we will remake the Republican Party, as it was supposed to be, I think. A party of constitutionalism, which, by the way, is only the rule of law. Constitution is law, right? A fundamental principle of liberalism is we have the rule of law, not the rule of men. You can't be a liberal without being a constitutionalist. Not a true one. So my final slide. Is that right? Yes, it is right. The Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street movement can agree on everything on this list, I think. And again, I'm not talking about the neocons who hijacked the Tea Parties, and I'm not talking about the stark Reagan Marxists who you can find in some of the OWS meetings. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about those committed in their individuality. But look, I think we can all agree on this, and I think everything on here is very liberal and is very conservative, small L, small c. A system in which members of the boards of large banks have positions in the country's central bank should be eliminated. Government officials should not be allowed to provide support for companies with which they are or have recently been associated. Wealth should be a function of hard work, risk-taking, and even a little bit of luck. It should not be the result of systematic transfer of wealth to a financial class with a special license by government to create money as debt and profit from fees and interest on that created money. A system that you can't have a system that allows profits to be private while socialising losses should be eliminated. It is an offence to the poor, let alone the rich. Wars that kill innocent people are bad if they're not in self-defence. Think about it, everyone. A minimum condition for military activity is that it must make us safer. Again, please, YouTube, Robert Payne. The Bill of Rights is still the law of the land. Telling the truth should never be a crime. Where government spending does not produce its intended benefits, it should stop, even if the left and right disagree on whether it should be redirected or not spent at all. I think all of those things are honestly left, honestly liberal, and are honestly conservative. And if we can just do this, perhaps by understanding what the politics of the left and the politics of the right really are, trying to talk to each other rather than past each other, with a sensitivity from which, about which side the other is coming from, then we would have gone. Well, if we like everything on here, we have to vote for it. But if we do this, we've gone so far back in the direction of the founding principles of this country that we will have brought ourselves from the brink. Or maybe we're already over the brink. Maybe we've already fallen off the cliff. It's a question of scrambling back up the side of the cliff. But we would have done that if only we could do this. So it's possible. And I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very much for your attention. Yes.
You have a background in physics and philosophy, correct?
Yeah.
So do you consider yourself somewhat of an idealist at all?
You know, I think that to see things as they are properly, you need to see them as they can be. I think the idea...
But that's, I mean, you have to admit that that's sort of idealist.
If you call that... Yeah, you know, I guess I'm saying, yes.
I agree with you completely on that. Like, yes.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think this is worth fighting for.
And telling the truth should never be a crime. But sometimes it is. Do you ever fear that maybe Ron Paul's campaign is a little idealistic?
No, because I'm not supporting Ron Paul out of some libertarian religiosity. If I'm a libertarian, I'm an empirical libertarian. I'm just saying, look, there's a bunch of options. And by a mile, this one's best in terms of getting to where we're going to go. Because what isn't going to happen is if we vote for Ron Paul, we're not going to wake up in a libertarian utopia, whatever that we like. It's not going to happen that way. It's a question of looking at the direction we've gone in, and which direction do we need to go in to keep our, these liberal values, right, to preserve these liberal values. So, I mean, are there things that are idealistic about Ron Paul's bid for the presidency? You betcha. But then the founding fathers were pretty damn idealistic, weren't they too? So I would say, in as much as they were, Ron Paul is and I am, and I would be, and as much as that is so proud to wear that banner. Yeah, please.
And more of a comment on something you said about the difference between why Americans get so irate and Great Britons don't. It might be that a majority of those that had to get pissed off Gene left somewhere around the end of the 17th century.
Yeah. I'm sure they are still leaving.
Yeah. And we welcome them.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. I feel welcome. And I believe some of my English friends in the audience feel welcome too. Is that true? Yes. Okay. Yes, a round of applause for America there. It is a fun idea that, basically there was a division of the gene pool. And those with chutzpah and who got a little, as you say, a little pissed off, got on the boat and thought, let's down the torpedoes. And thank God they did, because, what is, I can say this, I'm a bi-patriot. The best thing to come out of England is the US, that's what I do. And in saying that, I'm not putting down England. I mean, that is not, my intent. I am a bi-patriot.
Nor did I intend that.
So, no, it's an interesting point. Yeah.
So on the left, there's this discussion of imperialism, and the British have a history of imperialism. Can you talk about American imperialism?
Yeah, no, that's great, because I haven't really discussed foreign policy. I can't say anything better about American imperialism, if you want to call it that, than that study that I quoted, Robert Page, please do. He's much wiser than I am. He knows a lot more than I am. You asked me a very general question. Can I comment about it?
How do the British view their history with their overseas empires today?
Well, we don't have any. We lost it to the Americans. The world benefited from the fact that the British were able to hand over that mantle, I think, to another Anglo power in the Anglo tradition, the Americans. But obviously here, as someone who's supporting it before, I don't think that America is, let's say, expressing itself around the world in the most effective way to win friends and influence people. It's very difficult, because one thing I have to respect, I have to acknowledge, is that I'm not the president, and I'll never be, because the Constitution wouldn't let me be. So I don't see what he sees, and none of us ever will see what he sees. But one thing I do know is, and I think I made this point about things economic and things domestic. Good intentions don't determine. The intention doesn't determine the outcome. It's the method that determines the outcome. And translating foreign news, as I have done from around the world about the United States on my website, Watching America, that's what we do there. It is clear to me that it is the method, it is the presence, it is the way America carries itself that the writers in those newspapers in countries like Iraq and Pakistan and Afghanistan and all these other countries that we translate content from, that's what they respond to. You know, it doesn't matter if the Americans are really nice guys, really trying to do the best. It doesn't matter. It's the way that we hold ourselves. And the same goes for the West. I mean, you know, I see that, you asked about Britain. I think the British are sending some military capacity, naval capacity into the Straits of Hormuz. Now, you can, I'm sure there's got to, in some paradigm, there's obviously got to be a good reason for it. But at least the Americans maybe have the strength to deal with the consequences. Right? They have this awesome military. The English don't. I mean, I don't think the English could protect the Falklands again if they got invaded. I mean, maybe they could, but it would be a pretty damn close run thing. So why the British are stirring up the hornet's nest, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what point specifically you're getting at, but if you could be a little more specific.
Well, I guess my question is, if you believe what Ron Paul believes, that foreign interventionism is weakening America, and we're spending a lot of money in a lot of our lives.
Okay.
And so did you see that in English history, as they were an imperial empire, did they weaken themselves by stretching themselves too thin?
Well, you know, I'm not a historian. There are, by stretching themselves too thin, there are some things that characterize end of empires. And there are some great grand narratives that kind of relate, you know, the end of the Roman Empire, and the British, and the Dutch, and the American. And they involve things like credit. The credit bubble is always there. The credit bubble is always there. It was there in Rome, it was there in Britain. And here we are now in the US. Another one that's usually there is a change in the dominant source of energy. So the rise of the US and the decline of the UK will correspond with a shift from coal to oil. So there are things like that too. So I think that's a very complex question, and I didn't study history. So yeah, I think I'm going to say no more. I might opt out on that one. Maybe we'll take it to when the film, the cameraman is gone, so I won't be recording myself. Please, yeah.
You said that you don't believe, as in Ron Paul does, that it's not solvent, the system of our central banking.
Yeah.
I would kind of disagree on that, just because I believe that as we keep creating more money and running the value of the dollar,
Right.
I don't see how the system will stay solvent with, we've seen examples of 1940s Hungary, and then also
Sure, no, I agree.
Weimar Republic, yeah. So
No, no, but let's be clear. It's okay, so if I agree with what you said. Obviously, that is the danger. And nothing I've said, let's be clear, is against that. But that isn't a problem of solvency, technically. I mean, it's really semantic, but technically it's not a problem of solvency. That's a question of destroying a currency. It's a question of inflation. It's certainly a question of destroying the real wealth of a nation, and destroying a society. I mean, that is what we're facing. Absolutely. But insolvent means you can't pay your bills because you ain't got the money. Right? The point I want to make is that that is never a problem for the government. And if it could be a problem for the government, if it was true, as most people believe, that if the government didn't have the money through tax revenue, that they actually had to go to a market, you know, like a bond market, and raise the money, and therefore have a good enough credit rating to actually raise the money, and that a market would decide whether they were good for the money. If that were true, i.e. if they were limited by the need to be solvent, we would actually be in a better situation, because the market feedback would stop this runaway nightmare that we're establishing. So no, you were right, but the danger there is obviously as inflation is destruction of the currency, and with it at least the temporary, meaning maybe potentially for many years, destruction of the society. But that's not technically a problem of solvency.
Can you expand a little on what you were saying about identifying people in one of two camps by asking them one of two questions? Are you, I think it was, are you pro-life in your view of taxes? And I asked because if I were to ask somebody, well, what kind of music do you listen to, and what kind of car do you drive, and I pigeonholed them, I'd either be called a racist or something else for identifying them blanketly under only two criteria,
Right.
and not really getting to know them. So can you expand on that a little?
I think that's a great point. For some reason, it's okay to put somebody down by calling them a liberal, or calling them a conservative, or calling them a Republican, or calling them a Democrat. It's not okay to put somebody down by calling them, whitey, or black, or whatever. It's not okay. Well, so why is that? Why do we allow that? Why do we discriminate? And actually, it's a very good point. Because I was saying this yesterday to some of my new friends with whom I was having drinks last night. Some of the the libertarians here. When I've discovered, as a political writer, writing these articles in Huffington Post, the most important thing is not that I correctly and fully expound the point I want to make. That would be like, you've got to run down the football field and get to the end zone, right? It's not like that. It's more like walking carefully through a minefield. And the mind is writing something or saying something that triggers in your reader the box. Oh, he's just a libertarian. Oh, he's just a Republican. Oh, he's just a liberal. Because as soon as that happens, you're boxed, right? Which means your reader's not going to actually take care to. They're not just going to, take in what you're reading. They've dismissed it at that point. Well, sorry, they're not going to take in what they're reading. They've dismissed it. And we do it in discourse, all the time. I mean, there's that great quote. I don't know who said it, but people don't
care how much you know until they know how much you care. Are you talking about that? Or?
No, about how people don't pause to actually assimilate what you've said. They just pause to reload.
Okay.
That's what you're pausing. So and that's what. So I think and here if you're like doing what I'm doing and advocating for some political belief that you're passionate about, you're a salesman, and you can't sell by triggering that wall that comes up. You're in the box. You've got nothing to tell me.
So you were defending that idea then. I thought you were like defending that you could get 2 points on somebody and automatically know where they sit in which box, and by that understand them completely.
Well, I wouldn't say completely.
Okay.
But the reason I mentioned it is because it really shows the lack of creativity of political thought when it with respect to the two-party system. You're in one of two camps. Okay, I'm done politically. I mean, I'm this, I'm that. I'm just observing that it doesn't, that it contributes to getting the country into a mess. Because people aren't doing any original thinking because they want to be part of their team.
Or then do you hold the assumption that if somebody identifies as a Republican or a Democrat, that they blanketly accept that party's platform in its entirety?
Well, no, not always, and it's happening less. And the good news is, and the reason I'm here is because, I don't want that to be the case. Because you shouldn't be accepting anything, you shouldn't be accepting anything at all, let alone in its entirety. Look, let's be honest. If it wasn't for the fact that we were pumped with Democrat and Republican propaganda at the time, and everybody in this country, in this room, in this country had to go away and make up their own decisions based on data and the research they do for themselves. Do you think that half the population would all end up agreeing with this set of beliefs over here and the other half? Of course they wouldn't. It's absurd, right? So I'm trying to, I want to pull that apart. The solution is here. The solution is in this country. Not only is this amazing, passionate, energetic, innovative, smart country, I mean, hugely smart country. There's enough mental capacity in this country to do this. You just got to let it loose. Let it loose means get it out of the box. So I'm here trying to break down left, right? The Ron Paul bid for the presidency as a Republican is trying to get people to change what the Republican box is, and I'm all for that. Kucinich, go run on the Democrat ticket. I would really like to see a system that doesn't kind of concretize this two-party situation. Let's have the Libertarians able to get 5 or 10%. The Constitution is 5. The Greens get 5 or 10% credibly. Let's have a system that lets those voices out. More is better. More is better. Please.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the beginning of your speech you alluded to the fact that Ron Paul was doing what he had to do to achieve what he needed to.
Only in as much as he's running as a Republican and not an independent politic.
Right. So would you ever agree to the fact that maybe Obama is doing some of the same things?
By running as a Democrat? I don't know how else you
No, not by running as a Democrat, but maybe he would be doing something that he wouldn't necessarily completely agree with, but to further his agenda.
Oh, look, I'm sure politicians do that all the time, and I can be realistic about that. I'm sure if there's a Ron Paul presidency, he would have to do that as well. And I'm sure that, and I would hope that everybody who's supporting Ron Paul now, as soon as Ron Paul wins the presidency, then becomes his biggest critic and holds him to the fire. but that's a very different thing. I mean, if you're conceding, the taking, the assassination of citizens and, the takedown of the Bill of Rights and undue pressure, that's not something you compromise on. Saying, perhaps I could run as a libertarian, but I'm gonna run as a Republican because that's the way the system is built, which it is a whole different kettle of fish, as we say in my country. Yeah. My old country. Yeah. Yeah, please.
What are your views on our relationship with Israel?
I don't know. It's so complex. The thoughts I have about it are somewhat informed by what happened in Northern Ireland. And I once gave a presentation right next to the UN about that. And it was some years ago, and I think we're going to see a solution to it. I think we will see a solution to it. But again, you see, it's about political method. Right? If you're a third party, are your methods partisan? Are they fair? Or are they not? The problem here is I don't actually know what the list of priorities, the list of vested interests are of this nation in the way that it supports Israel. And I'm not saying therefore, I'm not saying it shouldn't. I really don't know. And I don't know, I find it really difficult to start coming up with specifics on that without seeing the data that must be there, somewhere probably secret about this issue, about actually really getting into the history of it. But I do know that, given my ignorance, I know that one people's starting place is right. You've got to start with the live and let live, and that applies to everyone. And it seems, I think, honestly, the problem with trying to step in as an outsider into these issues. America was able to help in Northern Ireland, but America helped. It only made a difference. American envoys only made a difference once they were invited in by both sides. Right? So we were not seen to be interfering.